Hello and welcome to another episode of the Feudal Future podcast. I'm Marshall Toplansky.
I'm Joel Kotkin.
And today we are delighted to have two really interesting guests to talk about Silicon Valley. First, our old friend Rony Abovitz, who is the founder of MAKO Surgical, Magic Leap, and most recently Sun and Thunder. And also Mike Malone, who is the former editor-in-chief of Forbes ASAP, which was the chronicler of the dot-com era and frequent writer and contributor journalistically to the whole topic of technology. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good to be here.
Joel, you want to kick us off with the first question?
Well, I can't avoid this question of being a person who witnessed many of the same things Mike did. How has Silicon Valley changed, and what do you think its trajectory is going to be starting now?
Wow, that's a small question, Joel. Every day, because I live in Sunnyvale, right in the middle of Silicon Valley. In fact, this is the oldest house in Silicon Valley that I live in. I'm going backwards in time. Just to drive down El Camino in Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and Santa Clara, and you realize that during the heyday, the golden age of Silicon Valley, it was small shops and strip malls. And now it's a canyon. It's an urban canyon where you're surrounded by 6, 7, 8-story buildings, hotels, businesses. That's a fundamental change in the valley that happened so slowly. You barely noticed it until one day, your favorite restaurant's gone and it's been replaced by an office building. The valley's become much, much more urbanized, and it's become much more top heavy. I mean, this was a town where I remember as a kid in the 60s, you could drive along and that building over there would be Fairchild and that building over there would be Intel. And now the Valley, these were all medium-sized firms. They were moving fast, but they were still relatively small. They had employments numbering in a few thousand. Now I'm just a couple miles here from Google headquarters, Facebook, the Apple mothership. These are the largest corporations, some of them in the history of the world, and the most profitable, and they employ hundreds of thousands of people. And I don't see as many of the little companies anymore that used to define this place. It's now a place of giant corporations.
Well, Rony, you are a serial entrepreneur and have been able to tap into the Silicon Valley ecosystem for financing, for growth of your companies. How do you see it having changed?
Well, I'll give you this perspective. So when I was founding Magic Leap, we went to the Valley around late 2013, 2014, to effectively get our first, real round together. And one of the Google founders, a guy named Scott Hassan, he's the one that introduced Larry to Sergey. So he's kind of the lesser known, but he actually wrote a lot of the code, and it was like really important foundation of Google. He ended up becoming one of our investors. We were on Sand Hill Road, did the whole thing. And at that moment in time, I think like after the crash in 2008, it kind of bounced back 2010, 2011. So 2011, 2010 through 2020 was an amazing period. And what I mean by that is like there was this exuberance, particularly around this 2011, 12, 13, 2014 timeframe, that like Larry Page become CEO again of Google. And, Mark Zuckerberg was like ascending without all the negative stuff at Facebook. And there was just this belief in like terraforming Mars and SpaceX and electric cars. There was all this utopian enthusiasm, right? And investors were enthusiastic, and they were willing to take lots of moonshots. In fact, we were a moonshot company, there was no doubt in what we were trying to do, but we were not the most audacious thing they heard. I mean, that was when people were pitching like Mars colonization or like mining asteroids. And it was like this, but it felt really amazing. It had that like Epcot Center utopian vibe. Then the 2020 crash, and then like the turbulence of like, we're back in 21, then it's crashing again. And all of the like really negative things that have happened in media about tech and actuality in tech. There's all these all this noise, and it's a darker, more pessimistic time.
Yeah.
I don't see the willingness to swing. I think people
the
are willing to
milk-
double down on that player's got 500 million, would give them more. It's
the mother's
hard.
milk of the mother's milk of Silicon Valley has always been early stage financing.
It's
Right.
hard now. It's really hard. I mean, you could still be funded, but it's not like, let me give you one quick example. Like, two friends of mine started a company called Leap Motion. They were like 20, 21, 22 when they started, something like that. Crazy NASA engineer and this another super bright friend. They walked around in the Valley like 2012, 2013. I think got like a $10, $15 million check within a couple weeks. Scruffy guys wearing sandals and shorts. That would not happen right now.
No, I was going to say, what early stage investment now? I mean, the VCs have gotten very conservative. I mean, they got burned pretty badly twice, 2010, and then they got burned really bad in 2001. They were writing gigantic checks, and you could get money with very little in your business plan at the early stage. Now they go for the sure bets and later rounds. You can still get large money in later rounds, but the scrappy startup, I don't see them anymore. And the VCs also got really burned by Elizabeth Holmes. These were a lot of the old veteran guys, and they kind of got carried away by a skirt and a big idea, and they lost a lot of money, and they created a lot of angry investors in their funds, and they got humiliated in court. And it seems to me they really kind of backed away. Now I'm hearing rumors just in the last couple of weeks that some money is starting to get invested. The deal flow is beginning again. But I know I'm working with a startup. I'm actually doing a book on them. My next book, I'm doing one of these full immersion books into a startup. And they've got an incredible product. They're a Google X spinoff, everything. They can't find money. They've been to 72 VCs. They were going for 15 million. They managed to get 9. That's the state.
I can totally echo that. I'm on the board of a company that's a fintech early stage company that has customers, has revenue, has a proven business model, can't get a Series A. And I think your point is that the Valley and the VCs sold the notion of being able to generate a better return to the broader financial community. And for them to be able to deliver on that, they had to de-risk their portfolios. They had to kind of, go through and say, okay, let's throw out the moonshots, as Rony would say. And I think it's changed the character. So it's now just banking as opposed to something really special.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think we've, the VC, Rony, when you went out, you were seeing the last of the old guard. These were guys who had actually run. They were former CEOs, a lot of them, of tech companies. There are not many of those now running VCs, agency firms now. It's, you got your Harvard grads with they got the right diplomas, but they don't have dirty fingernails. They're not ready for the rough and tumble of trying to keep a company alive and firing the founders if they have to and bringing another team and really, really scrapping along. Now they're just writing giant checks to basically established companies. I mean, it used to be, the joke was that there was the biggest gap in Silicon Valley was between angels and Series A. But now it's like the Grand Canyon. You can still kind of get money from angels, but getting Series A money is just insane. And then you look at the number of IPOs, they've fallen to almost nothing. So you're basically building a company to be acquired by a giant. That's
this reflects like something I saw happening, I would say in the 90s already, in the 2000s, where, no offense, Marshall, but the Harvard MBAs emerged. And, that's a very low form of life. And, and they brought the Wall Street mentality and the McKinsey mentality into Silicon Valley. I mean, the old guys, I think we knew some of the same ones, like Don Valentine. They were kind of crusty, almost all of them engineers, more working class. I mean, I think the class aspect, Mike, that you've written about,
Yeah.
The old Silicon Valley, there were a lot of like sort of crusty guys, LJ7, people like that.
The old Silicon Valley, the leaders of the old Silicon Valley were sons of blue collar workers. I mean, to go way back, Noyce's dad was a preacher. Gordon Moore's dad was a sheriff in Half Moon Bay. I mean, these guys came from working class. The last one left now is Tim Cook, because his dad was a longshoreman. And, he exhibits that sensibility, which the other guys don't. They're children of privilege. They're all children of the 1%. And they come at this in a very different way. They're not trying to build something enduring. They're trying to build something that can be flipped. And I think the other fundamental change in the Valley is the one you can't see unless you look real closely, and that's the shift right around 2003 from hardware to software. And when you're fabbing chips and you're building personal computers, that's a real life thing. And the financial structure of it is very straightforward and proven. Once you get into software and apps, it suddenly becomes, the scalability thing is wild. When Facebook can go to 1 billion users, and it passed Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola's been around for 120 years, and Facebook does it in 5. But you're manipulating people, and it's kind of a casino mentality. And you're not trying to deliver something for a price. You're essentially giving people stuff free so you can acquire their information. And I want
to hear from Rony on this, because
that's a different ethical view.
Well, and Rony, you've been involved in kind of the big data world, right? I mean, if you think about virtual reality or mixed reality, it's not just the hardware, it's the data behind it. How do you think about this?
Well, to Michael's point, I built my first 2 tech startups, MAKO Surgical and Magic Leap, blended hard tech, like building hard tech like computers where you need a factory, and then the operating systems and some of the applications. But I felt like that had more in common with like how to build an Apple, right? Like you made a real computer, you made a real thing, and people bought it, and there was a real exchange of value. What I never really liked was the idea that like, here's software that's free and we're extracting something from you. I think people are now seeing the twice, 2 or 3 or 4 times more you got to pay. Because first thing, you're paying with your data, and now you're being bombarded in micro-influence. The next thing is all that data is now feeding very large AI systems with data that you thought was free, that you thought were getting something. And now what they're doing is taking you and your capabilities and your knowledge and how you speak, all of this stuff, you didn't really know what they were going to do with your data. You're like, oh, they're benign. None of it was benign, right? The first wave was to micro-influence you. Then they're reusing that data to teach AIs to take over your job. So the level of cynicism, though, is pretty intense, right? It's basically saying most of the world's a bunch of idiots. And then we could just mine your data and mine you. You become the corn that we're harvesting. And I think the insult upon injury is that all these folks who put all their data and their photos and their family and their heart and soul into the internet, they realize that a few companies have taken all of that and they're monetizing it again by selling us back our collective knowledge, our collective data, and our collective wisdom. And there's no remuneration for it. It's like, oh, we let you use email or post a photo, and we're extracting so much value out of the collective, either stupidity or collective innocence. And like, contrast that to how the Valley was built, the part that got me inspired. It was like the guys that developed the Intel chip, Moore's Law, like Apple built a computer, Tesla built a real thing, an electric car. Like that feels like the nice part of the Valley, the dream that almost resonates with the American dream. But this cynical thing of like, I'm just milking people for their information and monetizing it in these like sort of somewhat twisted and dark ways. That's like the Valley going down a very strange place, like ethically gray, and it's drifted far away from like the sort of purity of building the transistor, build this like, x86 chip, make a PC. That felt like I'm moving society forward. I'm not just like milking people and treating them like a commodity,
I think Rony, you hit it dead on. And for me, Facebook has always been the embodiment of that cynical attitude. I mean, they were trying to get information out of their users surreptitiously. In fact, they regularly go back to find a new way to try to get information out of their users. And it's cold-blooded and it's heartless. And I think it's also geographical, interestingly, and generational, because the heart of Silicon Valley, what the era you're talking about, it's based between San Jose and Menlo Park.
Right.
The digital, the online world of Silicon Valley, the center of the valley, the heart of it, moved to San Francisco. What's the difference? Urban area, young unmarried people, professionals. What's the South Bay? Suburbia, engineers, mechanical engineers,
Families.
Up north, it's programmers. Down here, it's families,
Yeah.
shopping centers. Very different worldview. Now, so what happens when things get tough here in the Valley? Well, people kind of hunker down and try to find another job. What happened during the crashes in San Francisco? They all left town because they're here for the brass ring, and then they're kind of filtering back again now. But it's a very different attitude towards people and their markets and their customers and all that.
That does beg the question.
Valley wasn't a rough place. I mean, these guys were outlaws down here, but they had grown up in the real world, and they were adults. The San Francisco wing is a very different kind of place, and it's developed very in an odd way. It's kind of a migratory, young, really smart people world.
And I have to say,
beg the question about kind of the geographic future. Do you see the world of early stage companies and the world of technology kind of leaving Silicon Valley or leaving San Francisco for the portion of it that's software driven and being dispersed out into the rest of the world, where California will no longer kind of be the nexus point for it? Or do you think it'll continue to be a focal point?
Well, I think Joel will tell you that over my career, I think I've declared Silicon Valley dead about 8 times. So I hesitate to do that again. I think my response is, let's wait a little bit, because we're coming out of actually a huge boom time in the Valley during COVID. Kinda. I mean, the big companies did really, really well. The small companies, no. But we're sort of in this aftermath still. We got high inflation. We got, the craziness of the real estate here was nuts. The house I grew up in that cost $19,000 is now $3 million, and it's the same house. So all these bubbles emerging. I'm concerned because we're now in a down cycle for the Valley, and it's easy to get depressed, but I'm normally optimistic because down cycles are typically a time when you see startups, because there's the big companies are distracted. They've laid off people, really smart people, and those people have had ideas for a long time, and they form up into startup teams, and they have kind of a runway before the economy comes back where they can operate in stealth mode, build their prototypes, find some angel money and do all that. And then when the economy comes back, they come roaring out, and all of a sudden the Valley's on fire again. What worries me right now is I can't see the next big thing. AI, I don't know. I mean, it's getting a backlash instantly. We see this device on the Apple Watch they're talking about that's subcutaneous, where it can see your blood underneath your skin and actually do things like blood sugar, which would have a profound effect on diabetes, which is the disease of our time. Is that it? What's the next big thing? I could see them in the past, always just things starting to emerge, announcements of inventions. I would also see, remember when Apple came out with, it was buying up apps for the iPhone. I could walk into any Pete's or Starbucks or Denny's in Silicon Valley and see a group of people in their late 20s and early 30s, completely out of place, sitting around a little table, all with their computers out, all with spreadsheets on them, developing companies. And that's the phenomena you typically see during times like this in the Valley. And the VCs are swollen with money, so they're handing it out. You know, all of these factors, I'm not seeing any of them right now. And this concerns me a lot because the Valley always is the next valley. It's not the last valley. And it comes out of downturns into these upcycles. They accelerate the upcycles. And that's when you see all the great companies being founded. And I'm not seeing them yet. And that disturbs me. And I'm not sure, because everybody has to come here because this is the Lourdes, the world center of venture capital. If, you know, people like Rony with a track record like his is having a fight to get money, no startups, no hot new thing.
So, Michael, here's what's happening. I'll take the far extreme of this, but I do believe it. I think AI systems are the overwhelmingly most important economic force brewing, but this has been long in coming from like the 1940s with Alan Turing, right? Yeah. You know, working at Beckley Park to defeat the Nazis' Enigma machine. So this idea of like intelligent computing is at the heart and soul of the Valley. What's happening though is we're moving from the exponential growth of Moore's law to now a double exponential. Yeah. The double exponential is like, it's sort of like a Cambrian explosion. It's just like we're hitting a point where silicon and software and networks and the scale of data are all hitting some like emergent new capability of computing that is, my prediction is, surpasses every human capability before the end of the decade. Oh yeah, and the Valley is in the heart of it. So if you think about that, the Valley is going to be one of the main drivers in the world. There's other things in like Europe and Beijing, but like in this country, it's driving potentially the end of white collar work. Mm. And I really believe this, because if your job is sitting in front of a computer at a desk and not work moving your body, not working with your hands. If you're a paramedic, if you're a cook, if you work in a field, you're okay. If you're a construction worker, you're a cop. But if you sit in front of a desk like a data analyst, a programmer, it's almost inconceivable to me that we get into the 2030s and there's actually a need for you to do that job anymore. Because like the chips that are running,
it's kind of the singularity in a different way than we quite thought.
Yeah, it's like a white collar job ending singularity. And I think the interesting thing is, it has the Valley been on this trajectory always, and we just don't foresee things. But if we just keep going unabated, the free market is going to say $1,000 computer that could replace 500 employees in 2030. Why are we not doing that? Because the free market's going to force every CEO and CFO to do that. All white collar knowledge workers are done. Now I'm just taking an extreme view. And the Valley would then be ending the jobs of the people it started to create the jobs for. So what do you do with all those people?
Well, and by the way, look at the educational system that has adapted to all of this. You know, we have been told as educators that we need, over the last decade, that we need to prepare our kids to be coders, to be, programmers. I was in a class the other night. No, we were teaching our students SQL queries for advertising and marketing analytics. We just went to GPT, and it wrote the query for us in SQL.
That is the writing on the wall. That is like, the writing with white collar knowledge workers are doomed. It seems to be, and by the way, we're flinging more and more money into it, and that flywheel spinning. The question is like, that part of the population makes the most money, buys the most things. What happens when you don't need them anymore? Who is going to be buying things? And what do those people become? Baristas at Starbucks? Or they get repurposed as like field hands? Or do they all become farmers? The folks running the hyperscalers have this idealistic view that it'll just be universal basic income. Who's going to do that? Like, no one's really thinking through what happens when all of these things the Valley's been working on for 50 years all come together, and these computers we've built surpass us all. which is happening. I mean, there are folks who are like trying to ignore that it's happening, but it's ridiculous. Like between Midjourney and OpenAI, these are the early waves of things that already are better than like entire teams of people. And by the way, this one of my friends founded Midjourney. It's like less than 20 people there. This is like a kid in an apartment in San Francisco who effectively has, in his little world of coding, has in theory displaced every concept artist in the world, right? Because Midjourney can practically do every form of art in the world right now. Give them a couple more years and it's like artists are just going to be like selling pretzels on the street. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but it's so powerful.
If you open a daily newspaper right now, most people don't realize it, but half of it's already being written by AI. A lot of the sports stories, a lot of the business stories, all of that's all being done with computers. You know, I liken it to the arrival of the microprocessor in the early 70s, that we had this entire world of electronic devices, but they were essentially just simple digital devices. And then we got the microprocessor and we put it in everything to supercharge it. Now it's in our car, now it's in our phone, now it's in every part of our lives. And that drove the great Silicon Valley boom, was it retroactively sticking intelligence into everything. And I think that's where AI goes, but we'll see. I mean, Bill David out, you know, we're talking about venture capitalists. Bill David, the great venture capitalist, former vice president of Intel, he and I wrote a book just as COVID broke, called The Autonomous Revolution. And we address exactly what you're talking about, which is, what do you do when there are no more jobs? I mean, what do you do? What makes a good life? I mean, we're about to encounter a very deep philosophical question, is what do we do with ourselves in order to have a rewarding life? Not necessarily happy, but just rewarding. If we don't have a job, do our hobbies become our life? I mean, what do we do we sort of posited a future where you've got a lot of education and everything else. You're sitting in a one-bedroom apartment. Your food's being delivered to you free because we're at a time where we produce enough wealth without human intervention that it just comes to us, and we sit there. If we're blue collar but not physical, we were doing brain work. Do we just sit in an apartment and get our free wall-sized TV 24 hours a day? I mean, what do we do? If we're an intelligent person, do we just go in and make sure that, you know, that the dental tool is not drilling through the patient's head, that the AI is doing the proper job on a tooth? What do we do with our lives?
That's a great question, because the Valley is going to exhaust itself by perfecting computing that has effectively evolved past our brains.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen this decade. It was like that was always going to be a couple decades away. Now it's single digit years away. And every year more and more is being taken over. And the sacred cows are falling. Oh, it can't do creative things. It can't do accounting. It could do that. It can't write. It could write. I'm in some kind of online debate with a group of people who are like, I said, with the Screenwriters Guild taking a strike, I'm like, absolutely wrong time to do that.
Yeah.
Because the studios will figure out that probably within 18 to 24 months or less, some version of a chat GPT-like thing will write a good screenplay.
Oh,
and in 3 years, it'll write an Academy Award-winning screenplay that you won't know wasn't written by the best writers. Because anything we put into digital form, we've built things with bigger memories, faster learning capability than us. So our arrogance that only human beings can do it, all that's falling, and it's going to create this huge humbling moment of like, we are not it anymore on the planet. We have built machines that are way past us on everything, every single thing we do, other than like maybe human empathy or like hugging somebody.
I'll challenge you a little bit on that. I think competence is going to be worthless for very soon because AI is going to it's already taking it away. I think talent will survive a little longer because, you know, you have to ask the right questions for AI to actually produce something interesting and value. Genius, I think, and, you know, people at the extremes of a bit of creativity and empathy and understanding of human beings. I think they're going to be around for a while, but they're going to be a precious few. I mean, I'm not expecting AI to come up with, Don Giovanni anytime soon, or Wallace Stevens Sunday Morning, because those are creations that nobody else can do. They come out of the air and, out of the lives of individuals. So I think that's a tricky one, but an Academy Award winning screenplay, yeah, a while from now, but a movie about the next Avengers movie, absolutely. They could probably do that tomorrow morning and make $1 billion. So we're going to have we were worried about content for years. We didn't have enough content for all those cable stations and all that. Now we're going to be awash in content and resource management. I mean, it's going to get real efficient. I mean, like I said, there's not going to be a lot of need for human beings to go out and earn money.
Did you guys see the article yesterday about how they're training the AIs to recognize the patterns in brain waves to be able to then, in essence, read your thoughts?
Yeah.
It seemed as though the initial work on it was showing promise in terms of the AI basically coming up with the patterns that contextualized what was on people's minds. I thought that was kind of the last bridge, right? That what it is that you're thinking has always been the last bastion of privacy.
So Marshall, I'll raise my hand with a little bit of I've got mud on this one. So at Magic Leap, we had a pretty interesting AI team based in the Bay Area, and we worked with one of the top universities in the Bay Area. I won't say which one. And one experiment we did was having a person wearing one of our systems and another person wearing one of our systems, and one of the people wearing this mesh that could sort of read your brainwaves, working with one of the top professors in the world in this field. And let's say you would think about a red ball. It would then visualize in the augmented reality system the red ball you were thinking about. And then you could send that to someone else somewhere else. So you basically would think, and it would now send that image. And it was pretty insane. Like you could think cat, ball, dog, house. And what it would do, it was build this whole pattern model of how your brain would react with different images, right? And they did this whole classification system with functional MRI, and it wigged me out. I definitely was very nervous about this because we were maybe going, we meaning people and maybe even our team, we're going a little bit too far here. Because you could sense with, the fMRI relationship to like EEG and other sort of sensors, you could really build this classification library of how human beings would think and what that pattern would be with all these different kinds of like images and pictures and words. And then like without even saying anything, all of a sudden like there it is. And it's kind of, that freaks you out. And then like you're sending that along to someone. So you just think, and your wife or partner, whoever, can all of a sudden see what you're thinking. And are we do we need to back off? Like the whole question around this is, do we need to slow down and back off and reshape all of this technology to serve us, to serve the planet, to serve society? Because right now I think we're just serving the tech to make a lot of money. That's what the Valley is doing. It needs to refocus itself on how do we better serve the good of people, not the monetization of people. And I think we're going to have some unintended bad consequences if we don't recalibrate very quickly.
What frightens me is, except for maybe the counterexample of Meiji Japan in the 19th century, has any society ever not used a powerful new technology?
And this is something maybe as we, this has been a great discussion, but I worry about the politics here in that, you have a large class of people who have no visible way of making income or can only make slight incomes. That's going to cause all sorts of social issues. But I also find, for instance, that it can be used for authoritarian purposes, as it is being done already in China. And I'm thinking, Aldous Huxley saying that a technologically based regime can never be overthrown. That, in other words, that you so completely control information. And what I find is, and I don't know whether AI is just going to make this worse. I do a lot of research. I'm in the same stupid business you're in. And do research. And if I go to Google, I used to love going to Google. It would give me all sorts of different things. Now it seems that the algorithms are politically motivated. I mean,
yep.
If you ask the question, what's the biggest source of reduction in GHG in the world? It's without question, it's the shift from coal to natural gas. You can't find that. You go page after page after page. I do work, whether it's on, let's say, race issues. I get the PC version, for the first 10 pages. It used to not be like that. Couldn't AI be used as a way of in a sense, handicapping the political society, what we think about it? I think of my students going and doing research, and all they're getting is one point of view.
Oh, yeah, it's already happening, Joel. I mean, ChatGPT, try asking some unorthodox questions and see if it will give you an answer. It will refuse to answer certain questions. And some of those questions are actually valid questions that have been proven to be true, but you're not allowed to ask them. It's not going to tell you that. It's already censoring your life.
And that's what collaborative filtering is all about, right? I mean, as a technology, that's what's being used to basically say, oh, if you like this and you're connected to people who like this, then we're going to feed you this.
And it's like really weird because like our social media guy asked something about agriculture, my writing about agriculture and farms, which I've done a lot on. And he said, well, what does Joel Kotkin think? And I'm reading what he's coming up with. It has nothing to do with what I've written. It's the politically correct version of the future of agriculture. So, I mean, I just find this to be really frightening. And I don't know how a democracy can operate when a handful of platforms are able to basically create a version of reality that anybody who's doing research is going to be forced to accept.
So Joel, I did a series of these. We got a Knight Foundation grant with Dr. Julio Frank, president of University of Miami, and I did a series of these Knight Foundation talks with him on what we called computational autocracy versus computational democracy.
Right.
Which is your point, and you're completely right, because these centrally designed large computation systems, whether they're cloud and then migrating into like the layer on top of the cloud, which is like centrally controlled AI. Our theory is that it led to and leads to autocratic systems, autocratic societies, autocratic government, because a very small amount of people control the main source of information. And then you begin to convince people that my AI knows more than anyone else, and that is this valid source of truth, whether it is or isn't. But that central control, I think, corresponds to like autocracy, centrally controlled government. A democracy, on the other hand, and you can have democratic AI systems, you could have democratic computing. It's decentralized. And I think we're going to be in this really interesting battle of like, does decentralized computing win out in this country and in the West? Because I think if you don't have it, you can't have democracy sustained. I think we have to have decentralized computing in order to have a democratic government. Otherwise, too much of our lives are wound into a centrally controlled system, which is what China's doing, right? China is the example of like, how do you control large populations with totalitarian computing? And then they're exporting that like as an operating system to other smaller countries that want the Chinese way of a good economy, central control, surveillance of everybody. But in this country, which is supposed to be a democracy, we need to find ways to distribute that power, and it has to be distributed computing. And I think this is the real, by the way, the Valley was right in the middle of this, right? When Apple was founded, it was the small computer for me in my home, not the central server.
It was a rebellion against the MIS department.
It was a rebellion against the centrally controlled, that these powers control the computing. And then like that early Wozniak Jobs philosophy, that like rebel hippie philosophy, is given way to the biggest, most centrally controlled companies in the history of the world, who answered nobody really.
Remember, they started out as criminals. They were phone hackers. So
Yes.
they were the ultimate renegades. No,
They were underground, right? They were
they were
rocking.
completely underground. Yeah. To get Marshall to follow up on your point, um, if you remember, Joel certainly remember reading her, was Ada Louise Huxtable writing about
Sure.
cities. And what's missing, I'm noticing in this new meta world we're moving into, is random juxtapositions. Her notion of a thriving, healthy, humane city was, you had the record store next to the antique store, next to the, Jordanian food restaurant. It was random. You didn't know what you were going to encounter as you went along. But the modern internet is increasingly only a mirror. It's homogeneous. It's giving you back yourself in variations, but it's not giving you the unexpected. A perfect example is you used to go to the library, and you'd be looking for a certain book, but you'd be walking down the stacks and you'd see about 12 other books you wanted to look at and all that. That's the way Google appeared at the beginning, but that's not Google anymore. We're getting reflections of ourselves nowadays from the internet.
Well, that notion of orthogonal thinking, right? The idea of just things coming together that you wouldn't. I mean, we're fighting a war between the necessity for that, in order to be able to create vivid life that people are going to enjoy, and the reduction of life down to a series of probabilities that, in order to have the greatest probability of success, you need to juxtapose this together with this, together with this.
Yes.
How do we solve that?
Yeah, it's for survival. And I worry that AI is heading towards what the danger of monocultures. Farmers, they plant one crop continuously, and suddenly some alien parasite or something else comes in. I mean, I'm a great grandchild of the Irish famine. That's what happens when you plant one plant everywhere of the same, type. We risk having this monoculture, which is very vulnerable to outside forces. When the United States first started, I'm working on it. In my old age, I'm working on a degree right now in American history. If you take the colonists at the time of the American Revolution, they were obsessed with one half of what we consider the most important things about being a human being. There's liberty and there's equality. Now, liberty, well, let's start with equality. Equality is, and that's oftentimes called freedom too, which is I want to be able, in part of my society, to be part of every part of my society and not be excluded from anything. Like slaves, they were excluded from almost all of the society. They wanted freedom. They wanted equality. But the revolutionaries at the time of the revolution, they were obsessed with liberty. And the liberty is the ability to say no, the ability to live your life the way you choose, even if it's orthogonal to everything else. That you can choose to make a mistake if you want to. You can choose to be wrong. And that's human liberty. And that's fundamental with consciousness, and it arises from consciousness. That's the heart of what it means to be a human being. Are we entering into a world where we'll have infinite freedom, but we won't have any liberty at all?
Wow, that's great. Yeah, that's a great formulation.
Well, gentlemen, we've come to the end of our time. I think that the logical sign-off is just continue to be weird. That's probably the best thing we can possibly do for the planet. I want to thank you for being on the Feudal Future podcast. And this is definitely a conversation that we want to continue. So thank you very much for being part of the show today. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Feudal Future.